AAA studios who are having full 100, 200, 300 person teams committed to building Web3 experiences. This will truly take off when you have a hit that is meaningful on the scale of gaming, which is 10 million players or more. In terms of why are games building in Web3, I think it's because they see the opportunity to compete with the giant games of the world with a lower budget by leveraging technology that is way more value to end players. We don't want games that are just, DeFi yields with game wrapper. That's not interesting. There has to be an inherent value and autarky value to people playing the experience.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Blueprint, the show where we interview the innovators behind some of Web3's most exciting projects and learn about who they are, where they're from, and where they're going. The Blueprint is designed to be accessible to crypto natives and noobs alike. So if you're new on your crypto journey, we'd be honored if you start exploring with us. The Blueprint is a collaboration between XD Academy and the Spartan Group. I'm Lawrence, an entrepreneur and educator with a passion for making complex ideas simple. Today, we'll be talking to Robbie Ferguson, founder of Immutable. If you're interested in crypto gaming, you'll really love this conversation. This was recorded on December 6th, 2023. Robbie, how are you?
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Robbie, would you introduce yourself for those that may not know you?
Absolutely. I am Robbie Ferguson. I'm the co-founder of Immutable.
Excellent. And what is Immutable?
Immutable is the leading Web3 gaming platform. What does that mean? It means we are the easiest way that you can build a video game where the assets or economies inside that video game are truly ownable or tradable for real value. And we use Web3 technology under the hood, NFTs, to make that possible. But ultimately, our vision is when users interact with these games, they shouldn't have to know they're using Web3 at all. When developers build on this platform, they shouldn't have to learn smart contracts or Ethereum or blockchain security paradigms. It should be as simple as, I want to build a game and I want to make sure that users have real economic rights when they spend value inside that game.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell me, how did you get into this?
So I've been building tech startups the last decade, software engineer, with my brother, James, and my co-founder. I was a massive gamer growing up. I can remember initially we were big Runescape fans. And I don't know if you ever played Runescape, but you can basically die in the wilderness and lose your items for real when you verse other players. James and I shared an account, my brother. One day I went into the wilderness and lost all his stuff. And I felt so bad that I decided to buy in-game gold with my pocket money in order to get his assets back. I did that. And then the account was banned for real-world trading a week later. So I think it was pretty obvious early on the amount of power that these companies control over the assets and economies with impunity, especially because 6 months later, Jagex rolled out real-world trading just sponsored by them, where you could buy bonds and those would correspond to in-game gold, right? So I think it was pretty clear early on that this stuff was real and was valuable, and there was no really good solution back then for how you could actually get users' property rights. So, we started building startups pretty early on. First thing we ever built was a League of Legends betting platform where you could wager on your own matches. And that was successful until it got shut down by Riot Games, breaching their terms of service. We then built a Shopify competitor, which leveraged machine learning into optimizing your store based on pricing or copy. And we got into Bitcoin in 2014, but I became obsessed with Ethereum in 2015. I think it was just because you could build smart contracts with it, you could develop with it. I remember when I saw an application called Ethereum come out, which was basically a gambling dApp. And it was pretty obvious that if you could build in a few hundred lines of code, what governments spent tens of billions of dollars every year enforcing compliance, which was, heuristically assessing do slot machines pay out the amount they're going to pay out? Do they have enough treasuries to fund the jackpots? They've made all of that redundant with the smart contract. And then they did something that the companies could never do, which is they took the royalty streams or the revenues of these machines and they gave it to every single person who used the protocol. And I'm not excited by gambling as a category, but that was a microcosm or an example of, well, hey, if you can do this in 2 months, all of financial technology is going to get replaced by this stuff. And so we started building trading bots for the first few years until in 2017, we wanted to really build a long-term company and build something that would fundamentally be usable as a mainstream product of crypto. Because even at that point, the promises of a decentralized Uber hadn't come through. Really, the only use case crypto had back then was payments. And I think that's probably mostly true today. And so we decided when the first ever NFT came out, this would be it. It was a CryptoPunk. And we said, well, gamers spend $80 billion on in-game items every year. Why don't we use this technology to give them property ownership in the same way you can own a Bitcoin or an Ethereum? And that was really obvious to us. It's like, this is clearly going to be the breakout. And now that number is $150 billion. And we started by building the first ever decentralized game on any blockchain. It was fully on-chain logic. So we wrote every scrap of the game's logic. It was a robot battling game on smart contracts. We had a fully on-chain perk tree. We had a commit reveal scheme for randomness. This was, the most over-engineered, very basic robot battling game you could imagine. But it was very expensive to run. And I think it used up to 10% of Ethereum's compute at some point. And that went viral. It made a few $1 million in revenue. And Coinbase wrote their first ever venture check in the company. And we decided to build a platform because we realized two things. One, people had demand for owning their stuff in games. Two, it was nightmarish to build on. Building on this was as difficult as building on punch cards on the internet, right? So I think we had our job set out, which was in the same way as payments on the internet is now smooth and easy because Stripe abstracted it and made it that way. We wanted to make sure you could build real economy games where players had real ownership incredibly simply, easily, securely, and with sustainable economies. And that's, how we kind of gotten started and jumped to today. We also around 270 people around the world. We're the leader in Web3 gaming with roughly 70% market share. And we're really focused on how do we make this a mainstream expectation by players rather than an exception.
Yeah. And it seems like it's one of those things like the smartphone effect, right? Which is where the moment that you first held the smartphone in your hand, you knew that a feature phone would never be acceptable again, right? Like there's just some technological developments that there's no going back from.
Precisely.
And
one-way doors.
It's a one-way door. And I always thought that as a gamer myself, did not play RuneScape. So RuneScape, I guess, is an MMORPG.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know. I've heard the name a million times, but I'm a big gamer.
The amount of crypto founders or VCs, by the way, I've met who were massive RuneScape addicts is vastly overrepresented. So there must be something in the genes of RuneScape players, or I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. I always stayed away from those games. I think just because I know my nature, and I felt like, if I start playing RuneScape or World of Warcraft, I'm just going to be like, that's it, I'm gone. Right. So yeah, I've always
World of Warcraft was the one I always stayed away from because I knew that that's crack cocaine. League of Legends was that for me. I had 3,000 hours across a couple of years, the later 2 years of high school, which is not good. And I don't touch that game anymore.
I loved Age of Empires back in the day.
Yes.
And I don't play any PC games anymore. I play on my Xbox for the last decade or so. And they just released Age of Empires 2 on the Xbox. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I got to rearrange my whole schedule now.
I don't know if you can play that on an Xbox controller, would be my controversial take. I feel like that requires a mouse for any sort of sophisticated play.
They do a decent job of replicating it so where you can play on the Xbox. It's definitely not the same experience. So for example, they do have crossplay enabled. And mostly if you're playing on Xbox, you want to play against other Xbox players.
But if you get crushed,
you get absolutely smashed. But I think that we figured out that there's about 300 points difference on the ELO ranking between an Xbox and a
interesting.
Yeah, and a PC player.
If you're like 1500 ELO and you play Xbox, you can beat a 1200 ELO PC player.
You're going to be about evenly matched with a 1200. Yeah.
And it's ELO every 150 ELO is you beat the player 150 below you 90% of the time.
I don't know how they calculate it.
There's something. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I am I struggle to fight. I'm about a 1200 ELO player on Xbox. So that means I'm
That's
usually
on average, right? Or is it slightly above?
No, it's better than average. I'm actually, I think I'm like top 500 in the world.
Okay.
On
Well, that's way
Xbox.
better. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not bad,
That's
but I
pretty
mean,
good. Yeah, I
do.
won't play you then.
Well, don't play me on Xbox. I'll probably get you on Xbox. On PC, I think. So do you play?
I do play with friends. Yeah, we have
The
every
yeah,
4 months
the
we get
listeners are
group
going to be
together.
like, "Oh my god, what is this podcast about about Age of Empires?"
Yeah, exactly.
What civilization do you play?
Who's the ones where you have is it the Norse where you have the carriage which can pick up and it's like the granary is movable?
Oh, is that the new civilization you're talking about with the mule cart?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that thing. Yeah.
Okay, so that's like Georgians and Armenians but that just got released. Right. So you might be talking about a different game. Anyway, back to Web3. Cool. But I also played a fair bit of Fortnite and Apex Legends. And of course, these game economies are all based on skins, which are kind of fun. You know, you have the loot box. You hope you get something good or rare or whatever. You get to show it off, your new gun skin or whatever. But for a guy like me, like I just would never pay for that because it's not mine. I just wouldn't pay for a digital item that I can't get to keep or can't trade. And so I think that the moment games start letting you do that, it will be impossible to release a game that does not let you do that.
I think there'll be a shift in consumer expectations when you have a couple of mainstream games with 100 million players where they actually experience value. I think the first markets where you'll see this will be in Asia and will be in games like FPSs where huge audiences are used to playing Counter-Strike Go and getting very little value for it. And they want the ability to off-ramp this value and have guarantees. There's $12 billion of CSGO skins traded every single year. And Valve arbitrarily does things like trade lock assets, so you can only trade them once per week, making hundreds of millions of dollars of player goods valueless. So I think that's why you're actually getting such a positive reaction from some of those core audiences, even though that is a hardcore audience, because they already are trading and understand the value that is being given through this new property standard. And I think that over time, this will become the expectation. It'll be horizontal. It's not going to be, I'm playing a Web3 game. I'm playing a game with with an economy. And this stuff is real. And I think that comes down to the greatest trick the devil ever pulled in gaming was convincing the world that just because an asset is intangible, because it's digital, you shouldn't have any rights to it. And the rights to physical stuff is guaranteed by physics. When you buy a Pokemon card, Nintendo can make that card not usable in a tournament. They can deprecate by effectively creating new, more powerful cards, but they can never take that away from you. And in fact, the oldest, most scarce cards are typically the most valuable, even despite different incentives that, you're going to have divergent incentives over time with an enterprise that exists for long enough, or an economy or a game that exists for long enough. But when we take that into the context of something digital, it's great. Now you have zero rights. In fact, we'll have armies of lawyers working year after year to try and figure out how to gradually erode rights away from you, to have click fatigue and consent fatigue so that you get less and less. And I think this is about resetting those expectations, but at the same time, proving out to these games that there is a great business model here. There is a more aligned business model. There's ones where players will stick around longer. They'll spend more. They will be viable for less.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
The value proposition you're delivering to them is so much higher. And that is what excites me.
I totally agree. Obviously, an anecdote is not a meaningful data, but in my own sample size of one, if you release a free game that's supported by, buying of skins, you'll never get $1 out of me. But if I could own the skins, I would pay for them. All of a sudden I'm part of the economy. Right now I'm just a mooch, Maybe playing devil's advocate for a second. What do you think that the major gaming companies would say about why they can't do that? Why they aren't currently doing it?
Well, I think it's just time. This is new. B, there's really not been a successful proven example of we have to switch now. And there hasn't been much urgency, right? I think, in fact, over the last year, you have reduced urgency because tokens and primary sales have died off. And obviously, that's been a massive shift in the last 6 weeks. But also, there are many companies doing this. Ubisoft just announced they're building a game on Immutable a couple of weeks ago. We have multiple AAA studios who are having full 100, 200, 300 person teams committed to building Web3 experiences. You have Krafton in Korea building a Roblox competitor in Web3 with hundreds of staff. You have Nexon building MapleStory, one of their core IP, on Web3. You have some of the biggest gaming firms in Japan. I think the reality is this will truly take off when you have a hit that is meaningful on the scale of gaming, which is 10 million players or more. That really proves out a model of, hey, you can build a really successful game, and here's how you do it. And you've seen that trend in every other shift. We've had 3 major shifts in gaming in the last 20 years. You've had the shift to social gaming, so leveraging things like Facebook and social graphs. You've had the shift to mobile gaming, and you've had the shift to free-to-play gaming, which is less a form of distribution like social media or mobile, but instead a monetization and design paradigm for how you consumers pay. Each of these really only took off when you had an exemplar game that went mainstream and demonstrated, here's how you do it. And then everyone else copied that playbook. Mafia Wars, which was one of the most popular social games, was copied 20 times and reskinned into different things, literally the same code under the hood. And you had a skin version of it for, girls in a salon. And the same thing for gacha games. You had this huge new genre emerge when you had the first successful gacha game out of Korea. I think we need the same thing for Web3. We have had a couple of attempts. There's economies that are not sustainable, and therefore a lot of the copycats weren't sustainable. But that's why we do Immutable publishing, where we actually build these games ourselves or build the economies ourselves. So we know that we actually have the advice and the IP to be able to give to all the games building on our platform. But that's, I think, the moment that we need, and that's easily coming in the next 8 to 12 months.
What do you say to people who say that, building a really good game is hard? There's a lot of games that come out every year, and most of them don't hit that 10 million players mark. Many of them are just very average experiences, right? So for every Breath of the Wild or Baldur's Gate 3 or Grand Theft Auto, there's like 100 just very average games. Does it make more sense for someone like Immutable to try to develop a super popular game rather than for one of the game studios that has a track record to say, hey, we're going to release a Web3 game?
You're totally right. It doesn't necessarily. I think there's a mix, right? So you're having both in market. And we've seen the shift go from 90% Web3 native teams being like, we're going to build a game, to now really more like 70-30 successful Web3 teams and these Web3 native teams. The reality is, though, they're mostly going to be startups with successful veteran game developers looking to build this. Apart from larger companies in Asia, which I think is just, they're all in, right? They're building things. And I think there will be massive hits from those regions. But you typically need a new game. You can't just retrofit an old game because the economy hasn't been built to adjust to the fact that it's open and scarce and has immutability. Those are constraints that will impact game design. And that means the easiest way you're going to have a new game which embraces these mechanics well is, with a startup team that's building a new studio or a new game from scratch. But certainly, the number one thing we look for in when are we going to back a team, when are we going to focus on winning a game, is, has the team successfully shipped viral hits before? That's the number one predictor of will they be able to ship another one.
Yeah, for sure. Robbie, I'm enjoying this conversation so much, man. I always love talking to my fellow blockheads in the web in the gaming space. But I want to know a little bit more about you. So I found I did a little research about you before this podcast, and one thing I found is that you have an incredible academic record. Can you tell me a little bit more about Robbie growing up and kind of the man and how you got to be where you are today?
I was really obsessed with startups from a reasonably young age. So my brother's about 4 years older, probably since about 15 or 16. We would every night start to sit down and talk about what companies should we build, what startups. We had an Asana board and we'd just chuck in ideas and, throw them against the wall. And our goal was to fail as fast as possible. We probably only started technically developing from 18 because I didn't have software engineering background before that. But that was, we were pretty obsessed with building technology companies. Then, I did reasonably well at school, was very lazy from years 1 to 11, which I guess is like from the youngest year to the penultimate year, and then became very, very obsessive in the final year, which is a big competition in Australia. It's a bit ridiculous. And then decided to take a year off to focus on building startups and to focus on programming. Did a few other things as well. Got my ski instructor's license, which was a lot of fun. Was doing a bunch of tutoring to pay for it all.
Well, don't gloss over how you did in that final year competition, because I think it's pretty cool and it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, so I mean, in Australia, they rank everyone in an ATAR, which is basically you get a percentile score you beat. The highest percentile is you beat 99.95% of the population, and then it goes down to if you get below 30, you get a asterisk. And I got the perfect score, so that was great, and did well. So
obviously, very very intelligent guy we're dealing with here.
I would hope that it's meeting the minimum requirement, but I do have a strong opinion on.
Okay,
I do have a strong opinion in startup founders. I think there's actually a minimum intelligence, but I think beyond that, it's actually not that discriminating, unless you're really trying to do PhD contributions to machine learning or something. I think beyond that, it's dedication and it's emotional self-management and growth mindedness that will differentiate people. And so I think people over kind of optimize often for intelligence rather than for other traits, which I think are often far more indicative of success.
Well, I hope that's true as a startup founder myself, because I don't think I would have scored a 99.5% percentile in Australia if I was taking that. But okay, so go ahead. So you're coming out of school. You had already been kicking around ideas for startups with your brother for a long time now. You kind of knew this was the direction that you were going to go.
Yeah.
What happened from there?
So I think that's the year we built the League of Legends betting platform.
Got it.
And then we built some other things. And then I started university, and we were still building trading bots at the side at this time on crypto. Did a couple of years of computer science and law at Sydney University. And then it was actually over the summer holiday and I was pretty disillusioned, by the way. I didn't enjoy either of them. Computer science was fun, but it was not social. And law was sort of social, but completely boring. I hated it. And I would, I think, be the worst lawyer. And then over the summer holiday between the end of the second year and the third year, we built Etherbots, which was the game, and we dropped out before even university had started again. James wasn't at university, my brother. James was the lead engineer at Appliances Online, which is $1 billion e-commerce company down in Australia. So it was actually an easy decision to drop out because we already had revenue. We already had first traction. Then it was 2 months from there since we were able to fundraise.
Very cool. And maybe just one more question kind of on this before I ask you some more questions about Immutable. But one of the things that always interests me about learning in the Web3 space is that there is sort of a lack of formal learning opportunities. So people who are very knowledgeable, and certainly people who are very effective at building or just doing anything in the space, have to really, really be good self-learners and tend to typically have a procedure or habits that they follow to stay on top of the latest information or take in new information. Can you talk to us a little bit about your process around that?
Learning is probably core to our success. It's probably been the most important thing. We didn't know how to build a large company when we started. We hadn't built a large one before. So pretty much everything we were learning, and the main way we knew how to learn was books. We were pretty obsessed with reading books, like nonfiction business books. There was a few in particular that I think were instrumental, but anytime we had some new skill that we didn't know how to do, we're managers now, great, I'll read a few books on management. And the reality is people a lot smarter than us have spent a lot longer than us distilling their entire life experiences of domain into a single book that takes 3 or 4 hours to read. Yeah. And I think I'm quite against Spark Notes because they don't do anything. Because the value of a book is not knowing the content of it. It is understanding the situational context of that information and emotionally being bought into making those decisions and habitual changes. And so my favorite thing actually is when you read a few different books in the same subject and they have common threads, and then you start to build real conviction, and this is the common behavior or habits that matters in order to accomplish some end goal. So yeah, I'm pretty obsessive about learning. I love feedback. I think feedback is a gift, and we try and live that culture at Immutable. And both positive and negative feedback. It's not just negative feedback, because reinforcement of right behavior is just as valuable. Like ultimately, I think humans are like dogs. You give, Pavlovian feedback and say good job or bad job, and we'll do those behaviors. And whether it's verbal recognition or whether it's points in any other way, that's how all of society works. And then the final thing was just really interested in being coached and learning from people as well. So I have a few business coaches I work with at the moment.
Yeah. Tell me about what are some of your favorite books that you read?
So one, I'll shout out to Matt Mokri, who's the Brian Armstrong coach, and coaches a few other people as well, which is The Great CEO Within. It's an ebook. It's free. You can just search for it. I think it's literally a Google Doc. And this is like the Bible for starting or scaling a company, I think, from 10 to 100. It is literally everything you need to know in a 3-hour read. It is the most pragmatic and immediately applicable text I've read. I would also mention Scaling Up as the Bible for taking a company beyond 100. And this is the most commonly cited book I've heard as well from like giant decacorn founders. Founders of $10 to $100 billion companies all cite this book as the Bible for how you build and scale those. Big fan of Radical Candor around communication styles. Big fan of Radical Focus around working styles. What else has been particularly influential? Just read a fantastic strategy book called Playing to Win. I think there's been tons. A really good book for communication was 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I read that book 6 months into the company. James and I were fighting like dogs, my co-founder before that. We read this book. I haven't had a fight with James in 5.5 years. So when we just literally implemented that communication style. So I think the right book can be pretty profound. And I'm currently just about to finish 10X is Easier Than 2X, which is a great book. Really quite fun.
Yeah, love it. Wow, great recommendations. I'll for sure put these in the show notes. I love that. Thank you so much. So tell me, how do you think about Web3 gaming today as a market, and what makes a game want to build in Web3?
Well, as a market, I think it's very heavily invested in, but it's pre-launch. There's been 15 billion US invested into it over the last 3 years. The reason we haven't seen many hits today is the vast majority of these games take 2 to 4 years to develop. So the games that have been invested in 3 years ago are now going live. And we know the majority are going live over the next 12, 15 months. In terms of why are games building in Web3, I think it's because they see the opportunity to compete with the giant games of the world with a lower budget by leveraging technology that is way more value to end players. Even if you have a look at the 150 billion US spent on in-game items every year, typically if you have a look at finance as an analogy, if you have an underlying primary spot volume, so say there's $150 billion of houses being traded every year, or of term deposits, some financial asset, you would typically expect the secondary financial market of derivatives, of index funds, of options to be 1.5 trillion, to be around 10 times larger. So immediately we have this opportunity with gaming to make $1 trillion market around secondary financial options, around derivatives. And I think this is going to happen. There'll be Goldman Sachs trading desks going long on Fortnite skins from 26 vintage and, short on ARPG collectibles. And there's just going to be financial markets built on it because anything with sufficient volume has these. And I think there's huge opportunities there. There's opportunities for whales who are spending millions of dollars in these games to actually get value out of them and to feel like part of the ecosystem, to feel like they own part of the end game and protocol, rather than just, I've spent all this money and I have nothing to show for it at the end of the day. And so from a opportunity commercially, I think it's enormous. Then a lot of the people in Japan and Korea I've talked to just think it's better for gamers. They're constantly innovating to say, how do we deliver better experiences, better value to players? And they're the people who are saying to me, when we look at Web3 or the ability to sell assets in games and for players to own it, it builds a deep relationship. It makes the games more fun. Suddenly, this is part of this person's identity. It's not just, something they kind of play with for a year and then leave alone. You can transfer the value between collections. And I think that's really cool because ultimately, if we deliver better and more fun experiences, this market is going to take off. Whether there's a huge uplift in commercials or not, it's just going to be a much more attractive way of playing games.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you talked about the potential secondary market for gaming assets, and this is something I think about a lot as well as someone building a Web3 education company, and I start to think about even like what does the secondary market for learning look like, but then how would you respond to those people who say that one of the dangerous things about the crypto industry is this desire to sort of financialize everything?
I would say that everything is already financialized in gaming, just with no value to the players. You're already spending $10 on a skin, but you just have no rights to it. It's kind of like, imagine when you buy a home, you don't get any rights to it. You actually just renting it in for some period of time, and then it reverts, I don't know, to the government at the end of 50 years.
That is the case in many countries, by the way.
In many countries, right? And then someone comes along and says, hey, I actually think when you buy something, like you should have rights to it.
Yours,
I want a fairer system of property rights. And then someone says, you're financializing everything. I mean, it's clearly a bag holder with an interest in the incumbent system, trying to muddy the waters with whatever rhetoric they can find. The reason, and there is some truth to it, right? I think financialization becomes a problem when you develop games whose only reason to be played is because they're a casino or because they give rewards. And that's not what we're interested in. Instead, these are games that are fundamentally fun. People should be playing them. But when they spend $5 or $10 on a skin, now they have the ability to sell that later on. They have the ability to give it to their friends, their grandkids. They can use it interoperably. Someone can build a UGC experience or a modern, and they can take royalties. If you're the game developer, you can create monetization systems that are much more aligned. You can do monetization that instead is based on royalties and secondary market fees. So instead of you selling $1 billion worth of new skins every year that make all the old ones valueless, you can just take a 5% clip of all skins being traded in perpetuity. And now your interest is in growing the GMV of that economy as large as possible, is in growing the user base, and is making sure all assets are long-term valuable. That's, I think, I draw a bit of nuance there. And I think there is some truth to it. We don't want games that are just, DeFi yields with game wrapper. That's not interesting. There has to be an inherent value and autarky value to people playing the experience.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. I get that. And I appreciate that. So look, it is Wednesday, December 6th, as of this recording. It's going to be probably a few weeks before this gets released, but what's going on with Immutable? What are you guys up to? Anything big?
Absolutely.
Recently?
Yeah. Look, I think we have some huge updates. If you're listening to this just a few weeks ago, or tomorrow in my world, we're about to announce our partnership with MeritCircle DAO, who is going to be expanding and moving a lot of their efforts to Immutable zkEVM. This is one of the largest Web3 gaming DAOs in the world. They have hundreds of millions of dollars in token treasury, $100 million in cash treasury. And this is really the opportunity for, a year ago, we did a partnership with Polygon, which is the largest scaling protocol, combined with Immutable, the largest Web3 gaming platform, that had a massive impact. It doubled our market share, it doubled our win rate, it reduced the friction for game developers to choose where to build, and it created a single default platform. This is the next evolution of that. With MeritCircle, we're adding on the world's largest Web3 gaming DAO. We're adding on infrastructure that can help these games succeed, and we're able to work together, again, rather than competing with a player arbitrarily. And I think this is evidence of, Immutable and Polygon are such an overwhelming power in the market that people are choosing to build with us rather than compete against us. But B, it's an excellent example of where we can actually just create more value for games by simplifying rather than having to choose 100 different vendors in order to bring, to build on Web3 in the first place. So it's been a really good year for us. And, at the start of the year, we probably had 35% market share. We now have close to 70% of all Web3 games building on us. We've just announced people like Ubisoft building games on Immutable. I think more than 60 games won in the last cycle, which is more than any other cycle in Immutable's history. Those all being well-funded games. Next, the mission is launch Immutable zkEVM in beta next month and get these games live. We obviously have some, but the vast majority are going to be going live over the next 6-8 months. And I think there's going to be multiple hits. We want to make sure they're as unblocked as possible. So the user experience of adopting is frictionless. The developer experience is frictionless. They're secure, they're scalable, and they have sustainable economies. Those are our concerns.
You guys have 70% market share now. Do you expect more consolidation towards Immutable?
Well, look, I think this is going to be the first of many partnerships where we're finding ways to, remove arbitrary competition and instead focus on creating a unified platform with a better end experience. So I'm really excited for what this will do. I think to that joint value proposition, I think Immutable, Polygon, and MeritCircle is going to be, pretty much the default Web3 gaming platform. And, we will be doing many more major deals over the next year where we can see how can we bring on giant players into the space, but also how can we, anyone who wants to build a successful gaming platform or infrastructure, I think we're sort of the best place to do that at the moment because of how many games are building on Immutable platform.
Many people know that MeritCircle DAO and the Beam network was initially deployed on Avalanche. So what were the main reasons they chose to come out of exclusivity and expand to Immutable zkEVM?
Look, I think our stack is really built for, you can build your platform super easily, your product super easily for games. You have access to things like the Passport, which is a fantastic consumer user experience where you don't even know you're using Web3 or signing up to a wallet, as opposed to registering 24 sequence. We have the Global Order Book, which aggregates liquidity and exposes it to every marketplace so that you can tap into the maximum volume possible while still taking fees. And most importantly, I think we have the games, and people ultimately need to build products for these games. And I think, we're the best place for people to access them at the moment.
Yeah, very cool. What game are you most excited about?
I won't say most. I never single out one, but there are a ton over the next, 6 months I'm excited about. Obviously, Illuvium came out of beta last week. I suggest if you're listening to this, go play it. The Auto Battler Arena is incredible. We have Guild of Guardians coming out in March, which is looking exceptional. The early retention stats are beyond world class with our sort of beta cohort of that. We have, Space Nation. We have, more than 20 significant games, I think, in the next 4 months, which I'm very excited about. So across the ages, I can get a list up, but yeah, I won't go on and on.
Anything for the console players?
I think there's a couple of console games. Our main focus is desktop and mobile right now, but yes, absolutely. There'll be some FPSs, I believe.
Very cool. All right, Robbie, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing the time.
Of course.
That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to The Blueprint on whatever channel you accessed us from. And even better, give us a like or a comment as well. If you're interested in going deeper on your crypto learning journey, check out XD Academy's collection of crypto masterclasses on xd.academy. We have an incredible course on the economics of Bitcoin live now by none other than Saifedean Ammous, author of the Bitcoin Standard, and all course registrants and completers are eligible for token rewards. We also have a growing community on the XD Academy Discord, which we'd love you to join as well. If you like having positive conversations about crypto in a supportive and safe environment. Great seeing you guys. Until next time.